Good evening, and thanks for joining us. I'm Don Elhart. The world around us is changing so fast that even the most savvy user of technology can struggle to keep up. For each step forward, there are benefits and risks. A world that George Orwell once imagined in his book 1984 is not as far-fetched as it once may have seemed. In many ways, Big Brother is watching and keeping us safe and secure. But is it at the expense of our privacy?
Private citizens of the world, if they don't look out for themselves and protect their own rights, who's going to do that?
Cameras watch us so often, we rarely notice it. On public streets or in stores, if something bad happens, they might keep us safe or help catch that bad guy.
So sometimes you don't have witnesses, and so technology is your witness, and it's been very helpful.
Online, our world is expanding.
Days of just expecting full privacy don't exist in today's computer world.
People put all kinds of information on the internet, and they don't even realize what they're doing. I mean, we're our own worst enemies in that regard.
A Facebook post is now as accessible as a public record on file at the clerk's office.
People should know that the information is out there.
Anytime we track information, it's beneficial, particularly when we're doing investigations.
We all want to feel safe and secure. We all want to protect our liberty and privacy.
I mean, there's always privacy security issues, always is.
Now is the time to take up that discussion.
I think it's a great opportunity for us to have this discussion. I think there's viewpoints that maybe I'm unaware of that I will be enlightened.
And we hope you are enlightened this evening by our discussion. We're calling this 13 Wham Town Hall event Your Privacy, Your Security, because it is about you. We now go live to Mark Hyman at the theater inside the Strong's National Museum of Play.
Welcome to the Strong's National Museum of Play. I'm Mark Hyman, host of Behind the Headlines and the moderator of the Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall series. Tonight's topic, your privacy, your security. Cameras capture our every movement. Emails and phone calls get intercepted. The NSA is eavesdropping on everyday Americans. It's all very controversial, and we talk about it all tonight and a whole lot more. Now, we've got an anxious studio audience who's ready to get started with a lot of tough questions that we're going to put to our panel of experts. But I want you to know that you at home can also join us. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about our panel of experts because we're going to put a lot of tough questions to them and put them on the hot seat. So let's go ahead and meet our panel. Joining us this evening is Terrence Flynn. He's former U.S. Attorney for Western New York, and he's an attorney with Harris Beach Law Firm. James Shepard. He's Chief, Rochester Police Department. Larry Krieger, he's an attorney and the plaintiff in Krieger versus City of Rochester. Bob Lonsberry, he's the host of the Bob Lonsberry Show 1180. Now, additional information on our panelists and their organizations can be found on our website at 13wham.com. I'd like to emphasize that our panelists are here in their personal capacities. The views they represent are their own unless they state otherwise. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that we have an audience here that's anxious to get started, but you too can also participate. A question we ask on air might be yours. 13 Wham morning news anchor Evan Dawson is manning our social media desk. He'll explain how you too can be a part of this important discussion. Evan?
Well, thanks, Mark. We already have hundreds of comments that started coming in this morning in anticipation of this event, and dozens more in just the last hour. And in fact, I'm seeing more pile up by the moment here. If you want to join the discussion on Twitter, you can do that right now. Easiest way to do that is to use the hashtag 13townhall. You can also join the Facebook discussion. We've got multiple threads going. There's a lot of ways to get a hold of us, and if you want to do that, you can. I'll be manning the social media desk, and your comments, your questions, and your perspectives will be shared throughout the 90 minutes here. Mark.
Thanks, Evan. Now, this is a town hall, and we put questions to our panel of experts. But tonight, we're going to start things off a little differently because the first question of the evening is not going to go to our panel. It's going to come from me, and it's going to go to my studio audience. So I'd like you to respond by the sound of applause. I'm going to make a statement. I'm going to give you two choices and answers. Your two choices are enhance public safety or increase revenue. So tell me how you agree with this statement. The primary reason for the use of red light cameras is. Those who believe it's to enhance public safety, please applaud. Those who believe it's to increase revenue, please applaud. I'm going to put the same question to our panel, so by a show of hands, who believes it's to enhance public safety? Raise your hand. And those who believe it's to increase revenue? So our panel is divided 50-50, but I would say our audience was a little less divided. All right, now we're going to go to our first audience member question of the evening. Sir, please tell us who you are, where you're from, and what's on your mind. Step down here right next to me.
Dave Ibarra. I'm from Rochester, New York, born and raised, community activist exposing police misconduct and double standards. Chief Shepard, good evening, sir.
How you doing, sir?
In a city where your officer, Mario Masick, known in the streets as Cowboy, violated Emily Good's civil rights on May 12, 2011, for her recording him from her own property, okay? And in a city where you yourself, sir, have run red lights on non-emergency situations, and where many of your officers have, and in fact, in 2012 alone, 174 City of Rochester employees have been caught running red lights. This is specifically to red lights, obviously. 19 have paid fines out of those 174. 69, the records, they were lost. 20 did not even get forwarded to their supervisors. 30 received only basically a slap on the wrist, counseling, whatever that means, and a verbal warning. Is there a double standard, Chief Shepard, with the RPD when it comes to monitoring citizens' every move, when it comes to blue light cameras, and when it comes to ticketing individuals for millions in profit that have been raked in yet, when you yourself, sir, and several other members of your department continue to abuse your power entrusted upon you by us?
So your question is there a double standard?
Is there a double standard, Chief Shepard?
No.
What do you think, Bob?
In fact, I don't believe there is either. One, I respect and trust the ability of the chief and his administration to appropriately oversee and discipline the department. I also would note, and again, I'm opposed to the cameras. They're just about making money. They're an intrusion into our liberties. But I note that when civilians go through and they get the letter, that the punishment they receive is kind of an iffy deal. If you thumb your nose at the letter, you're good to go. And so if we were hauling citizens off to jail for not paying their fines or for engaging in the system, I'd be a little more troubled. But people have, people can blow it off if they want. And also, I think that, and forgive me, I'm going on too long, but I think it's difficult for citizens to oversee the actions of police on an intimate little tiny detail. I mean, police do things, they have a culture of their profession, they service well, and I'm not exactly sure that sticking them in the ribs for everything they do that we don't particularly understand, I'm not sure it's a good idea.
Just a quick follow-up with the chief for a moment. Just out of curiosity, does the police department have a separate disciplinary policy if any department personnel violate any laws? Is there something beyond the normal fining process?
In relation to just laws in general, what we have is a progressive discipline process, and that can range from conversation, could be written documentation, could result in termination. But it is dependent on, one, history, could be how egregious the act is. Those would be the things that would be taken into consideration.
Great, thank you. We're going to go back to the audience for another question. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, and what's on your mind.
All right, my name is Scott Forsyth. I'm counsel to the local chapter of the ACLU. My question is, again, to the chief, and I can assure you I will not be asking a yes or no question. Chief, you're very familiar with the stop and frisk practices in New York City, how those practices resulted in the generation of thousands and thousands of bits of data about people stopped but who never got arrested. Finally, the New York State Legislature had to step in and directed the police department to purge those records. We have a similar situation in Rochester. You stop people, do not arrest them, and then command your people to fill out these field interrogation forms. You are also generating thousands and thousands of bits of data about these people that just get thrown into a massive base. Why don't you follow the example of New York City and purge this information?
One of the things that we find with the information that we collect is that it is useful. There's been instances where someone's been stopped, interviewed, not interrogated, and as a result of that interview, later on you determine that person was involved in a crime. For example, an individual stopped, he may have had found to have blood on his clothes. Later on, you find that a crime has been committed, you link that person to that particular crime. So it's not a matter of just getting into the business of stopping people or harassing people. It's really about in the business of intelligence gathering, information gathering, and crime prevention.
Larry, does that seem reasonable?
Well, there's all kinds of unintended consequences when police and law enforcement and the city government start collecting data and putting it into databases. I'm glad that Chief Shepard is here, but I wish the mayor was here, because if he was, I'd ask, I would tell him, Mr. Mayor, take these cameras down. They're unconstitutional, and just like Reagan told Gorbachev, Mr. Gorbachev, take this wall down. Mr. Mayor, take this camera system down, because it's a totalitarian type approach. It goes against everything that's American, and the reason I filed the lawsuit is because I believe it violates due process, and that's the bigger problem here. And everybody who gets a red light camera ticket gets their registration information put into a database that is networked into a private corporation called Redflex, which is a foreign corporation. Parent corporation is in Australia. They have a subsidiary in Arizona that runs this franchise that they sell to cities, and you don't know what future unintended purpose that data is going to be used for either. It's not right.
Now, I know we have a lot of people here, have a lot of questions they want to get asked, and we were to get to as many people as possible. I'm going to go to an audience member question, then I got to talk to our viewers at home after that. But I want to get to this gentleman. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, and what's on your mind.
I'm David Rydell. I live in Rochester. And I want to talk about these chips they want to put into your body. In Revelation chapter 13, it talks about the mark of the beast on their forehead and hand, and the total control of the government. And it sounds like enslaving the government and controlling. There's a controlling spirit I see coming in this country. It wants to control everyone and keep us under control. So this is my question.
Terry, what do you think? What about this issue of marking people?
Well, I mean, I don't have any experience even as U.S. attorney or as a defense lawyer in that specific issue. That seems a very specific and intricate issue. But the broader context of that question is the issue of control. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, you are in a situation where people want to be protected. We are dealing with people who have spent their time trying to commit the crime or obviously to harm the individual, so they have to collect the data that they need. But the flip side of it is what's too much. I mean, we're now at a point where people are being concerned that there's these extensive databases that have information, whether government's going to control you or use it in an inappropriate way. I mean, the best we can do in this system is to use the checks and balances that we have. We have to rely upon the courts to test the law enforcement. Then they seek a search warrant, and they seek to use some type of intrusive method that it meets probable cause, that it's tested properly by the judges, and that hold the law enforcement to that on a regular basis. But the flip side of it is, a lot of individuals are using that data to their benefit. So as we talk about the cameras, or we talk about easy passes that obviously have cameras of you coming by, a lot of lawyers have used it in civil actions to benefit their client, to show what really happened during that accident, or maybe to absolve the person who was allegedly the defendant and turn out that really maybe somebody else perpetrated the crime. So, to get back to your point, the control, you're right. It's a very large concern. What's too much, what's too little? I wish I could say it was a defined yes or no answer. I think what you have to do is what you're doing tonight. You have to test the government, and the government needs to come in and demonstrate that it has probable cause. It needs to renew or reapply its search warrants if they're using them, and it needs to demonstrate to the court what's the purpose. As you mentioned in New York City, in that case, the documents were purged. And those are issues that I think, unless you speak up and you test the government or your lawyer tests on behalf of you, then these things will go awry and they will control, because there is a danger in that data being in somebody's hands.
And then, Bob, if there's a natural conflict between privacy and security, how do you draw the line? How do you draw the line between those two, and how we make these decisions on what to keep, what not to keep, what to collect, what not to collect?
We've got legislative decisions are made, judicial decisions are made, and social norms are established, and I think that divides the two. On the mark of the beast, I know about chips being implanted in people, but an analogous thing is the collection of DNA. Which has become increasingly common and increasingly useful in law enforcement. And some folks are uncomfortable with that. Some, myself included, see that it is exactly analogous to fingerprints. You know what I'm saying? The question is, if someone's arrested for a crime, what sort of crime? When do we take the swab or their DNA? When do we put it in a computer? How long do we keep it in the computer? So it's not exactly the mark of the beast, but there is a modern analog in law enforcement. It is your DNA, and when should the government be empowered to collect it, and to what purposes can it put it?
Mark, if I could just answer that.
Please.
Take the flip side of the equation. If you're the lawyer representing somebody who's been accused of the crime, and you're concerned whether they are the proper individual, DNA is being used every day to absolve that person, to clear that person of the accusation that's been brought against them. Obviously, that's in the best interest of law enforcement, that's in the best interest of government, and it's clearly in the best interest of the citizens. So, as much as he's right as to the concern about DNA, it is being used often by the citizens and their representatives to absolve themselves of the accusation, to show that they were not there when the crime was committed, they did not commit, whatever specifically it is. So it is a very fluid issue, and you can't just box it in one area. You have to test it, and then if you can use it to protect yourself, you have that flip side of the benefit. I know we hate to hear that, but that's what we as lawyers and citizens do. If we can use it, we'll use it to obviously clear ourselves of any accusations.
Now, we have an auditorium full of people here today who want to get a lot of questions asked, but we also have people at home who want to be a part of this important debate. So we're going to go to our social media desk to see what's on their mind. Evan, what do you have for us?
Well, this is a good problem to have. We have so many comments, and a deluge of comments specifically on red light cameras started this morning. Of about 300 comments today on red light cameras, our audience online is tilting about 70-30 against, pretty similar to what we're seeing in the audience here. But there's a mix of comments, and I want to not only read a few comments that we've gotten on red light cameras, but also close on a specific point that I haven't heard raised yet. So here's a few points here. Leanne Reed says, of course, it's about revenue, but there are crazies on the road, and I support various strategies to curtail reckless driving. I say keep it up. Ellen Ladol's trafficant says, totally a cash cow for the city. I hope the court sides with the lawyer who has a case against the city. That would be you, sir.
That would be me.
Ken Barlow says, no one wins in a trade-off between safety and liberty. Patricia Fessmeyer says, several of us received red light tickets when we were in a funeral procession last year. That was a fun one to fight. And finally, Daniel Jordan says, we should put them up on every speed limit sign up and down 390. It would slow the lawbreakers down. And that comment struck me because Mark is going to get into some of the specifics tonight on some of the statistics, some of the numbers. Do they work? That's a common question. Do they really work? What does Chief Shepard say? What do the numbers say? But if law enforcement says they work, shouldn't law enforcement also want cameras on speed limit signs, on the thruway, on 390? Should we have them there? What's too far? Is there a slippery slope here? That's a question people are starting to ask, Mark.
Thanks, Evan. Now, Chief, the latest data I've seen, there are approximately 32 red light cameras in Rochester. I think there was an authorization up to 50. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So what about the suggestion from the viewer? Should we have a lot more around the city? And are they doing what we think they're doing?
I think it's dependent on what you view the value of the cameras is. From my perspective, it is about safety. And if people drive according to the rules of the road, we don't have any red light tickets being issued. And I think that's the main thing that people need to take away from it. A lot of the discussions I hear, it sounds like it's a game. Like the game is not to get caught. The game is not to be caught by the police and written a ticket. That's not the game. The game is to go from point A to point B safely without having to worry about somebody running a red light, somebody making a right turn on red in front of you and resulting in an accident, which may result in an injury.
Larry, do you agree with that?
Respectfully, Chief, I definitely disagree because there's equal data that says, well, first of all, the data is inconclusive. There's no study in Rochester that most recently proves any of this out, but the anecdotal data and studies around the country have shown that it actually increases accidents because people become gun shy and step on the brakes because they're in that dilemma zone where it's a green light but about to turn yellow and you're afraid you're not going to have enough time. And there's actually cases that show that it increases danger at intersection. But here's why I don't believe that it's about public safety, and it's really about public finance. One is that if the city was really concerned about public safety, they would take this almost $4 million, clear money, easy profit that they bring in, and they would put it towards public safety. They would put it towards improving those problem intersections. They don't do that. secondly, none of these red light cameras are in the county, in towns or suburbs. It's only in the city. And third, there was no explosion of red light accidents. In fact, the way this came to town was by Redflex sending lobbyists to New York State and selling a bill of goods to the city council. In fact, they got in trouble for not having one of their lobbyists registered, and they paid a fine, but they were successful in lobbying, and they sold this turnkey package to the city. And if you go to the Redflex website, the way they market this is that the city has an opportunity to, this is their wording, raise surplus funds. And that's what it's about. It's a golden goose that lays the golden egg for the city of Rochester.
Since Evan brought this up, and just so people know, the moderator is not taking position in this debate, but I do want to share some details that we have found at 13 WHAM. According to a Federal Highway Administration study from April 2000, or a report from April 2005, here are some of the summarized findings. That red light running crashes accounted for 44% of all fatalities at signalized intersections based on 1997 data. Once red light cameras were installed, right angle crashes were reduced approximately 25%. Rear end crashes increased approximately 15%. Combined right angle and rear end crashes decreased less than 1%, and the percentage of right angle and rear end crashes resulting in injuries remained the same. Let's go to this gentleman. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, and what's on your mind.
I'm Chris Brzezinski. I'm from Fairport. I teach at SUNY Geneseo. And my question has to do with internet privacy. Every time we go on Google or many other sites, everything that we put in that email message is being monitored and stored somewhere. How is that used by law enforcement on a routine basis or on a special basis?
Let me go to the former U.S. Attorney. So, Terry, how is some of that information that's out in the public domain, the commercial world, used by law enforcement?
Well, in order to use that information, obtain it, law enforcement would have to seek, or the prosecutor would have to seek a court order. You cannot readily obtain that information. There's many areas where you won't get it. Libraries, there's very strong laws. State of New York has a specific regulation on a very strong threshold to meet accessing library information, including if you're at the library and you're using the internet at that place. So there's high thresholds to get it. It's not very easy for law enforcement to access it, but they can. They can seek a court order to go to Verizon or any other Fios or provider to get it, and sometimes they do utilize it. I mean, in some areas, this is a clear-cut, easy one. Some areas it's beneficial when you're dealing with an individual that's using the media to try to entrap a child for illicit purposes, and they're engaging what they believe is a 14-year-old child or a 13-year-old child. Obviously, law enforcement will be able to meet that threshold. They'll be able to demonstrate that, obviously, it warrants the production of that information. Who is he communicating with? Who is he? And so forth. But again, you have to go through the process of testing it. So as a U.S. attorney, we would have to go before the federal judges. We have two magistrate judges here in Rochester, Judge Feldman and Judge Payson, and demonstrate to them that you have probable cause for the issuance of a court order subpoena to seek those records from the entity. That does not prevent Facebook, Twitter, Verizon, whoever, from objecting in court, and they do, or try to fine-tune the subpoena to very limited information, maybe location, the name of the person, and so forth. So there's a thorough process to go for, but law enforcement cannot just knock on the door of Verizon and say, hand me these records. It doesn't work that way.
Bob, as sort of a follow-up, should we be concerned as just everyday citizens the kind of information that internet service providers and social media companies keep that
you bet.
Whatever we send?
You bet. I appreciate the professor's question relative to what can the government get on in those venues. But I'm not necessarily seeing the government as like my enemy or a particular threat to me. However, there are a whole lot of people out there, from the con man down the corner to the Chinese government to who knows who, and my information's out there, available to anybody who's smart enough to get it. And I suspect they're probably going to put it to nefarious ends. And so there are two issues here. Privacy relative to the government, and I think the Fourth Amendment handles that, and privacy relative to others in society. And both are very important, but this one is where we are most often in this day and age victimized, because there are bad guys out there, and we throw our entire life out there to be seen, and that often ends up unpleasantly.
I know Chris has a quick follow-up.
Yeah, every time we sign on, we send an email through Google, that information stored somewhere. Even to register for this event, we had to send a name and an email address. And I'm thinking that's a little bit extreme. Is there anything we can do, or is it too late to resist that as individuals?
And the moderator has all the information, by the way.
I just want to comment real quick on this whole thing about the internet and what you do over your phones. Because the fact of the matter is, a lot of information people give away. Whether they're using Facebook, whether they're using Twitter, whether they're using the internet, they get on it, they give it away for free. And like you said, it is stored. And we may not want to use it as government today. Maybe 20 years from now, we will want to use it. And so people have to be vigilant of that. Even with the phones that you get that offer you free phone apps. Those apps are allowed to pull all your data, who you text, who you call, and record that data. If that's a concern for you, then don't use those apps. Don't use those cell phones.
I mean, the other thing to keep in mind that's very important today is when you do it at work. I mean, the form of work is a very important arena, and both the federal Congress as well as the state legislature are looking at it. I mean, in my law firm at Harris Speech, we have a team of labor lawyers, and they regularly are giving advice to companies on defining a social media policy. It's very explicit. You have to, as an employer, make it very clear to your employee what he or she can expect when they use the work computer. You have to delineate that, if you're going to be accessing the passwords, they need to be told that. There are very strict rules as to when an employer can get access to the information you use on your work computer. Now, that doesn't still take away the concern you may be in doing it at work, because you're taking a risk, and I think the last thing you want is to have this issue vetted out in a courtroom. But there are now more and more, you're going to see laws coming down, and they've come down, that are very explicit as to protecting individuals when they use the computer at work and what are their expectations if they're using social media. So it's going back both ways, this question, this internet use and so forth. In that case, your legislators are saying, listen, you the employer, before you ever think that you're going to go on that computer and look at what he or she did, you better make sure you have a very explicit policy that details all their rights, what the expectations are, and so forth. Because if you don't, your policy is not going to meet the threshold the law requires, and you may be subject to lawsuits. And they are being sued. So again, it gets a little bit into the form. Library is obviously the most obvious. Employment's different. So when you do it is just as important as where you do it.
Now, I want to certainly get back to our social media desk in a moment, but I still want to get to this gentleman's question. And I want to tell the ladies in the audience, I'm looking forward to your questions as well. Let's not make this a men-only event. Ladies, please raise your hands. I want to hear from you. Sir, please step over here next to me. Right over here. Please tell us who you are, where you're from. What's your question?
My name's Dan. I was born and raised in Rochester. Kudos to the gentleman who brought up about the B system, even though it seemed a little off topic. I think he was right on track. I think this whole thing is much bigger than anybody's making it. What is the deal with surveillance systems in cities? This is affecting our privacy, our constitutional rights. On your level, you might see it as a revenue generator or even a safety issue. What I was going to get at is the implementation of smart meters and other such monitoring devices placed more and more by force recently in our homes. Devices which cause cancer, report activity in the home, such as your power usage. You allow for turning off of your power remotely. This is all part of the bigger beast system, which is inevitably to come. But how are we viewing privacy and security in this aspect?
And let me follow up with that, Larry, because if you take a look at where the technology is going, you're looking at things like smart refrigerators that can actually store data on what you put in and take out and so forth. So should the public be concerned? Is there more data being collected on us that we don't know where it's going, or is it okay?
Well, I think absolutely people should be concerned. It should be smart consumers and learn about the technology that applies here. But for me, some of those things like smart refrigerators and so on, they're useful. They have a good purpose, and it's in your own home, and you placed it there, and you know what it may be capable of. The problem with the red light camera law, and the reason I brought the lawsuit, is, to me, if you're just driving down the street, minding your own business, law-abiding citizens shouldn't have Big Brother cameras on every street corner, especially only in the city and targeting certain neighborhoods.